Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast, sitting in the cockpit of a kind of a newer airplane. But I'll welcome again my co-pilot, my able-bodied co-pilot, Austin Ward, to the cockpit of this sort of a new look plane. It's kind of done a little bit on an emergency basis. But Austin, what do you think about this new cockpit?
What are you talking about? My beard?
No, I'm talking about where I'm sitting. Where you're sitting is the same old cockpit.
Yeah, I understand that that's like an actual flight simulator where you're sitting right now.
Yeah, actually it is. Had to go to my what I call my prized possession, my computer, which runs my flight simulator, to do this week's podcast. May stick with this. May decorate a little bit more in here in my little. This is my. If there's a man cave, this is my altar room to the man cave. You see what I'm saying?
I love it. It's nice to change things up every now and then.
Yeah, and I think your man cave is best defined by what's hanging on the wall. And I got a 75 in the other room in the real man cave. And here I've just got my 32-inch monitor. But it's good for seeing those final approaches like into Opelika, or something like that. I mean, but anyway, I digress. Let's get right into it. You and I are talking Ohio State football because, like I say, when we talk Ohio State football, we're talking national football. We're talking the national football scene. Hope people understand that, and we're not talking Wyoming football. Wait a minute. Did I just step on something there? Dude, I like how that guy, I liked your response to that guy that took you to task on, was it Saturday night when you were rejoicing in the way Josh Allen played, a great Wyoming alum, played against in that third match with New England this year and just stepped to the plate and hit home run after home run, right? Yeah,
so that was after I was initially criticized for praising Sam Hubbard.
Yeah.
And this the side of the family that I married into that grew up in Columbus has been a lifelong Bengals fan, and I've always been sort of agnostic with NFL teams. I cheered for my fantasy teams, but when you have a little one running around and the influence from that mother, this has become a Bengals household. So the fact that you have the Bengals, and I'm allowed to support anyone I want, by the way, and it doesn't impact my job at the NFL level, and we literally watched Sam Hubbard grow up before our eyes, that's pretty cool to me. So, I'm happy to support those kids wherever they are, but especially when they're in the Bengals and I'm at a watch party to see an NFL team try and break a 30-year streak. And some people are just so angry, Tim. I don't get it. I know. Normally I let that go, but this particular account has been doing this for quite some time, and I had a little bit of enough. And then I followed up by that by getting to enjoy one of Wyoming's finest exports, Josh Allen. It was a great Saturday of NFL football. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we're going to see if he's gotten over the hump, man, because getting over the hump means you also got to beat Kansas City eventually, right? Yeah. But wow. I mean, I love watching
Josh rather Allen. Than later.
Yeah. I like watching Josh Allen play, man. I really like it. And, you got to do like me, when Hubbard makes a play, I just tweeted hubba hubba. I didn't get into any kind of like gushing or anything, but in my mind, that's gushing because Sam Hubbard's one of my favorite guys I've ever covered at Ohio State. I mean, a guy I would ask for investing advice. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? It runs deep there with that guy, and just one of the great fellows we've run into, right?
And I mean, hubba hubba, I probably would have gotten the same amount of trouble.
You probably would have.
Golden God maybe a little bit over the top, but also that's kind of the point. Like, anyone who follows me knows that the Twitter account is generally for game days supposed to be in good fun. I don't sit around tweeting play-by-play. I think there's plenty of places you can get that. So I like to have a little fun with it and drop GIFs for big plays instead of descriptions. And that's, this isn't new. I've been doing it for however long you've known me, Tim, 10 years.
Yeah, me too, man. And I want to tell you something too. I never apologize for being a sports fan. I am a sports fan. That's why I got into like sports journalism, for want of another term, covering teams, et cetera, because I enjoy sports. I think you and I are pretty objective, when it comes to things. When, Ohio State, we're pretty objective about Ohio State, its pluses and its minuses. It's really cool to be covering a program, though, that's got a hell of a lot more pluses than minuses. Agreed? As I like to say, I covered Ohio State football from 1984 to 2018 and at the Columbus Dispatch. And I said, well, if it'd been Indiana football or something, I probably would have covered it about 7 or 8 years. and look for something else to do, right? But it's got enough drama. It's got enough decent bowl trips, because that's what you live for. Trips to Iowa City aren't what you live for, right? But I mean, that's why you like covering Ohio State, because most of the time, at some point in a season, it's going to be in the national picture, in the national hunt. But that doesn't mean we don't cover the warts too. And I think you cover the warts about as well as anybody. And I think you agree with me on that, don't you?
Yeah, I think that there are times that you and I get similar criticisms, and that we aren't hard enough on Ohio State or critical of them. And it's to me, they're so dwarfed by all the other things that are positive here. And it would be, you'd be going the complete other direction if you focused on the few things that were going wrong. The defense last year was not good. We've pointed that out. And yet the year before, you could see some of the justifications why they didn't make the move. We're going to get into all that a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But the point, this team, this program, I've been covering them now over a decade since I got up here from a different situation where there was a lot more to be critical of at Tennessee. They've been in a New Year's Six bowl game every single season that I've covered them. So how many things could really be wrong? If I spent all that time focusing on the 2 or 3 things that you could be critical of all the time, well, 97 of them are positive. That wouldn't make sense to skew the coverage that direction. And then I know you and I have a similar philosophy here. They've won well over 90% of their games since I've been here. So yeah, I pick Ohio State to win pretty much every game that they play.
Yeah. And
that means that you and I have a pretty good record of picking winners. Like, that's sort of the way it goes. It's just, I understand that there can be frustration from fans, and they want to win a national championship every year. And other fan bases, as seen by just this one person we're talking about on Saturday, are pretty jealous of it, I think. And that's what fuels a lot of this. Like, we don't have anything when we cover this team to really be negative about. It wouldn't be fair to do that when they're so wildly successful in the first place.
And as a teaser, the stuff we were negative about, pretty heavily negative about this year, the head coach understood that. And you're not going to know until we sit here a year from now whether he took care of business in that regard. But, oh, my goodness, he's made some swings, man. He's chopped at that tree, to pardon a Greg Schiano philosophy. I'm talking about Ryan Day with getting rid, I think is the right term, 3 defensive coaches, bringing in 3 new defensive coaches, including a new coordinator, including a new safeties coach, and Perry Eliano from Cincinnati. We'll get into whether or not I think he ought to be coaching the corners in a minute, since he had pretty good success with that at Cincinnati. And then Tim Walton, basically the defensive backfield coach, but corners coach also, former Ohio State player, guy I covered a long time ago. His dad was a coach. I knew he had coaching in his blood. He's been in the NFL for a long time. Coached in college also, was a defensive coordinator in the NFL for a season. Ryan Day has taken a swing at this, knowing he had to get things fixed, along with his offensive line, right? I mean, Greg Studrawa has been replaced now by Justin Fry from UCLA, a man with whom Ryan Day has history, a man who has worked for Chip Kelly, who really, if Ryan Day has a mentor out there, it is Chip Kelly, not necessarily Urban Meyer, even though he worked for him for 2 years. I mean, he's more from the Kelly tree than the Meyer tree. Let's put it that way. But, just keep this short in this summation. He has taken his big swing again, right? Yeah,
he recognized the situation and he understood the assignment. And this is what sticks to me. And I think I brought this up last week that, people in the Woody are saying, well, they know that they don't get 6 more tries to get it right. It's a little bit of a jab back at Harbaugh over his comments and how long he had. Ohio State knows that the situation is very different. Ryan Day knows that after losing that one in November in the Big House, if that happened again in the Horseshoe, well, the whole thing for him might collapse upon itself. And he doesn't get a bunch of mulligans because the standard at Ohio State right now is simply so much higher than it is at Michigan. And, he could have gone either way with Greg Studrawa 3 years ago, and he kind of wrestled with that one before electing for that continuity. But you saw the things mounting over the last couple of years. They were concerned in 2020 about the interior pass pressure, which when you had Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis, it was hard to understand why that would really be a weakness considering how talented those two are. And then they worked to address that with the tackles, and then the short yards and red zone situation didn't work. All right, well, that was sort of the straw that broke that back. You're looking at, linebacker production and overall scheme and matching what Ryan Day wanted. That wasn't working out. And Kerry Combs was going to have to take a step back to a position coach and a pay cut as his contract expired at the end of the month. So that was a situation, again, that could have gone either way, but this was more Kerry Combs leaving. And so that meant, all right, we'll focus on this plan, which is 2 secondary coaches, Jim Knowles running that show, and then feel comfortable from there. But that's pretty sizable.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have maybe thought, because Matt Barnes got another job as well. Al Washington was encouraged to see what his options were, but you're not looking heading into year 4 to be replacing 4 spots on your staff. But Ryan Day didn't just say, hey, the other part that I mentioned, they won 11 games in the Rose Bowl. They were young and inexperienced. Maybe next year they can be better. He didn't take that approach, which would have been easy for him to do. No, he took the more aggressive approach, and we'll see how these hires all work out. But I mean, that's pretty substantial for someone heading into year 4 to be remaking that amount, that number of spots on the coaching staff.
You know what? With that in mind, I want to get to my guest this week. He's been on a couple of times before. But he's one of my favorite people. And Jake Ballard, former Ohio State tight end, former NFL tight end, was part of a Super Bowl winning team with the New York Giants. Gave up one of his knees for football, so to speak. But he and I are on a tailgate show every week during the season on 97.1 The Fan, and I've really come to respect his observations about football because he was down in there. He was that glorified tackle, at Ohio State, the tight end. And he understands offensive line play. And I wanted to pick his brain a little bit on what could change, what could Ryan Day really be seeking to change on that offensive front that could make it that powerful, power running game like he wants to augment this ridiculous passing game. Like you just touched on a second ago, and we'll come back and talk about this after Jake is done. This team led the nation in total offense this year, but Ryan Day wants more. He knows in certain situations it was not anywhere near as good as it needed to be running the ball against teams that knew it was going to run the ball, against defenses that took away their run game. That that just rubbed as a game even is going on. Ryan is going, I got to fix this. One of the ways you fix it is maybe get a little bit of a different approach from the offensive line. But, let's get to my a little interview here with Jake Ballard. We talk a little bit about deer hunting too, man. If you'll notice, he's dressed in camouflage for this, but he's gotten a few pelts for his belt this year in the deer hunting realm, including bow hunting, which is pretty interesting. But let's get my conversation with him, and then you and I will come back and really chop it up. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, I want to jump a little bit deeper into this, into these coaching changes, but not the defensive side. I mean, the fact that I covered Tim Walton as a player, and that Eliano is from the same neck of the woods I'm from, East Texas, Killeen, Texas, but he played at Stephen F. Austin State University in East Texas, right just north of Lufkin. We'll talk about that for another day, but I wanted to bring in my good buddy, Jake Ballard. We have become good buddies, haven't we, Jake Ballard?
Absolutely.
I mean, the man owes me some venison jerky. So go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say we just been making the golf rounds this past summer and looking forward to a bright, long golf season 2022. I do owe you some deer jerky. Like I told you the other day, my mom got me a dehydrator for Christmas, so we'll have plenty to go around.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling a little dehydrated here, so that would come in handy. I wanted to get you in here.
Long weekend,
huh? Yeah,
from a long weekend.
Yeah, not like the old days, man. It's not like you. Every time I look up, you're at another in-law's house or something, celebrating Christmas, or I'm not sure what you guys were celebrating this past weekend, but the celebrations just continue at the Ballard place, right?
Unfortunately, yeah, we have a lot of Christmases to go to, and this one got pushed back due to lots of COVID sickness and people not wanting to get the elderly sick. So eventually we finally got the last one knocked out of the way this past weekend.
I got you. Well, good for you, man. Hope you got many. Hope you really got many of the gifts you really saw. And we're going to get to you sitting up in a deer blind with a bow and arrow in a moment. But I wanted to get into, because to me that's as interesting as anything else we're going to talk about. But to Ohio State fans, they want to know. Wait a minute. Ohio State led the nation in total offense this year. C.J. Stroud, obviously a Heisman finalist. Two receivers jumped over 1,000 yards. One had two of the greatest games in Ohio State receiving history, Jackson Smith and Jigba, with 215 catch games, one of which was in the Rose Bowl, where he set a bowl record for receiving yards, et cetera. Half of that was Yak, but what I'm getting to here is Ryan Day. Throughout the year, you heard that Ryan Day was probably ready to part ways with Greg Studraw, the longtime offensive line coach. I think if you've been someplace 6 or 7 years, you'd call that long time anymore in this age. But let's just get right into it, Jake. You and I did that tailgate show, for 3 years now running. We talk about a lot of things. I really trust your football knowledge as much as anything else. But what is Ryan Day? What is he seeking on that offensive line from a coaching standpoint that could be different with Justin Fry coming in from UCLA? What do you see that could be different, or what he might be after there?
Well, it's kind of interesting to finally see a staff from Ryan Day that's all his own. We're finally to a point, both sides of the ball, they're all his handpicked guys for the most part, besides Larry Johnson, but he'd be on anybody's staff, no matter what coaching change. But I think Ryan's just really looking for the days of having just a dominant offensive line and being able to run the ball when it's called upon and needed. I mean, the imbalance between the passing game and the running game this year was very obvious, but it shouldn't have been with the caliber of line that we did have and have coming back. And obviously our running back situation with, Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson, in my opinion, two of the best backs in the country. I am biased, but the sky's the limit for those two guys.
Yeah.
So the fact that when the games were on the line in Michigan specifically, because that's the most glaring loss of all Buckeye fans this year, our line got dominated and we couldn't really move the ball on the ground when we would need it to. Their pass rush was very apparent and got to CJ and affected the game, and we couldn't run the ball to try and slow those guys down. A lot of times throughout the year, we just were doing, inside zone, outside zones, jets trying to stretch the edge, but there really wasn't a up the gut. There was no power, really no counters. And I think that's what Justin Fry is going to be bringing to the table.
Yeah. And when we say that, we're talking about against credible defenses, because obviously there were a couple of games where they just ran all over some people, but we're talking about the games you got to win to win a Big Ten championship and a national championship, right?
Well, yeah. I don't care what Travion Henderson runs on Tulsa, it kills them. When we needed to dial up some runs to attack the line of scrimmage and move the line of scrimmage with our line, it seems like we couldn't do that very well against the team up north.
As you think back on it, because I'm hitting you sideways with a couple of these questions, but what was it defensively that you think gave this offensive line problems when it came to running the ball? I mean, you and I sat there and we talked about this. I mean, to me, watching it, it was like a lot of teams when they would slant and angle a little bit and just kind of or switch just before the snap, jump just before the snap, things like that, or not attack like you thought they were going to. Really seemed to give this, seemed to give this offensive line pause on occasion. I mean, is it that simple? I mean, just what did you see? Because obviously Utah had it going on there for a while in the Rose Bowl, but when you throw for 600 something yards, you're really giving up a lot just to stop the run. But go ahead now.
Well, yeah, and against Utah, we didn't give up one sack, so it was pretty crazy. The guys on the roster can do it. Why they didn't do it against Michigan, Michigan, I think, was the better prepared team. They were hungrier. They were unfortunately tougher. Like we've heard all these quotes from Michigan's coaches and Steel Chambers and all those guys. And it was just the truth. What was causing them fits? Two outstanding edge guys who might both be first rounders. Some super solid linebackers hitting the gaps and, getting off blocks, and a little bit of moving from the inside. But it just seemed like overwhelmingly we were the physicality, we were outmatched, or just did not decide to turn it on. I mean, I've been watching these guys, O-linemen, Ohio State, for years. They're tough. They're strong guys, athletic. They could dominate that game. We didn't, for whatever reason. I think we've named a plethora of them.
Yeah. But I mean, what seemed to give them fits too against Michigan, for example, was Michigan and a couple other teams did this too, lined their defensive ends well off the line. I mean, meaning a gap of sometimes 3-4 yards, maybe bigger than that. It just took running, just ran right at the offensive tackles and stuff. And, we all know the infamous video of Aiden Hutchinson knocking Thayer Munford backwards on that one play. But, that was kind of like one out of many. But it was a little bit of an example of a shock and awe kind of like situation with Michigan's defensive line against Ohio State's. So let me ask you this, just from a scheme standpoint, what can Justin Fry fix there besides saying play harder? You know what I mean? What can you fix there? Because one of the things that bothered me when I watched Ohio State's offensive line against credible defenses was their inability sometimes to get to the second level, to get kind of tangled up in their double team blocking schemes and things like that. And a linebacker, like you said, sometimes he wasn't even fighting off a block. There wasn't anybody there to block him. I mean, especially on that 3rd and 1, that first possession against Michigan in the second half, the linebacker just shot the gap like the defensive line had blocked him open a hole. You know what I mean? Which is what you hate to see with your offensive line. But what can you kind of change there when you're a zone heavy team? You run a lot of RPO. What can you change to get your offensive linemen still more aggressive on those runs? I mean, you know what I mean? That's a lot of things at once. I'm sorry, man.
No, you're good. I mean, I think I don't know Greg Studrawa. I can't even say.
Studrawa. Yeah.
Studrawa. I've never been around him. I don't know what they're teaching them in the meetings and stuff, but it just seems like with ours very zone heavy and RPOs, it was very almost like position blocking.
Yeah.
Cut this guy off, not be the attack, be the point of attack. Let's move the front.
Yeah.
It's like we were always I don't want to say catching, but sometimes kind of catching and just getting in between guys and moving the line with the zone plays. Where Justin Fry, at UCLA, he came in 18. He took their yards per game rushing from 175 or 158, I think, to about 215 in 2021 season, which is a huge improvement. And I think they did it by doing, like I said, getting into the power game. You're pulling the backside guard, having a tight end, maybe 2 tight ends in there to try and run downhill, and then doing some misdirections with the counters, whether it's a guard center counter or guard tackle or guard counters. And I think for running backs that can be downhill runners, AKA, I think Travion Henderson can do it, but I'm more talking about Mayan Williams. Mayan Williams is a power back who should have that in his bag, or not. It's not his fault. Power should be in the offensive bag for him specifically. Yeah. Talking to a guy who when I came to Ohio State, they set me down and said, hey, we need you to block 46, 47 power, and you'll get on the field a lot as a true freshman. And I did. And that's what, kind of got me playing time. But with him, I just think we're leaving a lot of yards on the field. And from Justin Fry's standpoint, I think changing that mindset of being an attacker and working on drills and expectations can help change that. You'd be worried if you didn't have the guys in the room. The guys are in the room that can get the job done. So it's just all about implementing his scheme, his expectations, and all of that into these offensive linemen at Ohio State.
When I said if you could get block 46, 47, man, you can get yourself on the field. Did you say, wait a minute, what about these? What about these?
Right. That should have, looking back, that should have been a red flag. I'm like, wait, am I not going to catch the ball very much? I'm just
yeah. Well, what are you talking about? I'm a tight end. I'm not a tight tackle. Right. Anyway. I guess, we've talked about that before on the podcast. We'll talk about it many more times. How you get short shrifted sometimes just when you think you've landed in dreamland. I want to ask you this though. Does it help that Justin Fry has worked with Ryan Day before, a couple other places? And number two, everybody associates Ryan Day with Urban Meyer. He worked with Urban Meyer for 2 years before becoming the head coach. He played under Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator at New Hampshire, worked under him a couple places in the NFL, et cetera. Does it help that Justin Fry is coming in having coached under Chip Kelly and kind of like is thinking the same kind of thoughts, because obviously Greg Studrawa grew up in another kind of offensive way. And it's not knocking Greg Studrawa. He won a national championship at LSU with that offensive line, et cetera, way back when. You remember that game, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I didn't mean to bring that up, man. You just shot yourself in the foot with your bow and arrow, didn't you? Hey, but does it help that they're like-minded? Justin Fry gets it. When Ryan Day says, I want to get this done, Justin Fry understands the language he's talking. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, but it's like, I've obviously never been in coaching, never been around in the back means of college coachings, but I would assume after being around football at every level that it's kind of like your teammates, what to expect, what they're expecting and the kind of mindset. So, their relationship goes way back. And I'm sure, Ryan seeked him out before they announced the parting ways with the O-line coach and told him the expectation and probably told him what they're looking to improve on. And he knows what he can bring to the table. That's why he was sought after. So, it's definitely a better hire than finding somebody who's never worked under Ryan, I would, in my opinion, because it's kind of unknown except for what you see in the resume or just from the game film. But, now Ryan knows how he conducts himself in practice, knows how he talks to players and sees a lot of value in that where he wouldn't have brought him in.
When Ryan Day took over in 2019, after the Rose Bowl 2018, major change on the defensive side of the ball. Brought in two guys from Michigan, brought in Jeff Hafley. The defense got fixed right away, because 2018 was not that was not a great defense either. They played 3/4 of pretty good defense in the Rose Bowl and almost blew that, against Washington. He's taking the same swing at this tree, man, with his axe, bringing in Jim Knowles, a new defensive coordinator, and of course Tim Walton, Perry Eliano, a guy from Cincinnati, but has been around the block many times coaching wise. Heck, he even played at Stephen F. Austin State University north of Lufkin in Nacogdoches, Texas. So he knows where I'm from. He may not know that I know where he's from, but then Tim Walton, who's been in the NFL, was a coordinator in the NFL at one point, was coaching with Urban Meyer and his staff. But my point is, what does this tell you about Ryan Day that he's willing to make? Not willing. Willing is the right word. That he made these kind of sweeping changes to his coaching staff to address, in essence, the elephant in the room, which was push come to shove. There were times they couldn't stop people, and then push come to shove, there were times they couldn't run the ball down people's throats. What does that just tell you about his makeup as a head coach?
Well, I think it tells me he obviously self-evaluates, right? Their strengths, and a lot of coaches don't do that. I think that's what separates like mediocre coaches from great ones. And he's not going to give his coaches and friends passes just because they are that. He expects them to do their best job to put them in a situation to win. And I'm sure in 2020 they talked about everything they needed to fix, and he probably didn't. He kept them all on. And he expected that to be fixed, and it wasn't. And he had to make tough decision to put the the team in a better situation to win. And that's hard decision, but that shows me it's a great leader, because he wants to put a better team on the field, a better product, because he knows if he wants to start winning some national championships, our defense needs to be even like 50% better. Not,
Yeah.
100%.
That's all it takes,
better.
man.
Just a marginalized percent better, and we will have chances. And it's just so crazy how the world can turn. A couple of years ago, they're talking about Al Washington, Tennessee and all that stuff. I wish him the best. I think he will do good. I think he's probably better fit for a D-line job. And he's over there with Marcus Freeman now. So that's exciting for him. But I'm really pumped to get these new guys in here. Ellis, Perry
Eliano. Yeah.
Perry Eliano, Coach Kobe Bryant at UC, the Thorpe winner is Sauce Gardner was a first team All-American down there. They had two of the best DBs in the country. So he's bringing a lot of knowledge. Walton, Jalen Ramsey had the highest praise. He said he might be his best DB coach he's ever had and great human. And he really tried to get to understand the players. There's a reason why, Urban kept him on because he obviously knew what he could bring to the table.
Yeah.
And then just having Jim Knowles be the D coordinator and the linebacker coach. In my opinion, the linebacker is where we need the most improvement. People could argue the secondary or linebackers, but in my opinion, the secondary, there's a lot of young guys who didn't have very much experience. So, but the linebacker, I think, is where I'm looking forward to seeing his fingerprints the most.
Yeah. And there's two ways you can coach. You can either play catch up or you can make the other team be playing catch up. And the way Jim Knowles goes about designing things, et cetera, you want that offensive staff on the other side scribbling throughout the game. You know what I mean? Like, oh, wait a minute,
right.
They jumped into this, blah, blah, you know what I mean? I mean, that's the kind of feel I have about what he's bringing to the table. You've watched him, you've watched Oklahoma State a little bit and stuff. I mean, they did get to that level, didn't they? Do you agree? I mean, obviously the Baylor game didn't start out like Oklahoma State wanted it to in the Big 12 championship game, but they finally did get their act together in that game. But what's your feel for what he brings more than anything else? I mean, is it that unpredictability or is it the aggressive part of it? Maybe it's a combo, right?
I think it's a combo. And like we've talked about on the Tailgate Show for 3 years, Ryan's ability to make adjustments throughout the game faster than most college coaches. A lot of college coaches will wait until halftime or wait till the end of the quarter. It seems like Ryan's making them after every series. And that's the NFL mindset that he brought to college. Not saying it's not earth shattering, but some college coaches didn't do that.
Yeah.
They don't do that. And I think that's what Jim Knowles brings with, him, that he's like, well, we'll do this. All right. They figured that out. We'll adjust to this. You know what I mean? And he's also going to come after you. So
yeah, let me interrupt you. But that's what Jeff Hafley brought, remember, in 2019.
Exactly. And that's why
the same dynamic. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and that's why Hafley took our defense in 2018, which was eerily similar to our defense this year.
Yeah.
And then we made us back into a top 2 or 3 defense in the country. And then we lost it again. Now, you could argue in 2019, we had studs in the backfield. I mean, second defense, we had some a lot of first round draft picks and one guy on the line, number 2, named Chase Young.
Yeah.
But, and 4 linebackers who had 3 or 4 years experience. Anyway, but that's what I'm keeping my hopes realistic. I'm not expecting us to jump into be the top defense in the country, but I do expect to see a night and day difference in the product they put on the field and just the assignments and how the guys are playing.
Let me ask you this real quick before we move into you sitting in a deer blind waiting for that deer to wander in, where you probably sprinkled all kinds of corn and stuff out there to make it seem like, hey, this is a buffet, which my big brother used to do down near Llano River in Midwest Texas. But I'm really jumping the gun on that conversation. What Jim Knowles did with that Leo position in the Big 12. I mean, with that basically a stand-up defensive lineman, really, who kind of moves around. You used to line up in major college football and in the NFL with the Super Bowl champion team. How much is that going to befuddle or going to give offensive lines pause about what's up, almost from one play to the next, or almost from one from 1 second to the next, or where's this guy finally going to settle in? Is he going to be in the A gap? Is he going to be in the C gap? Is he even going to be, is he going to drop into coverage, zone coverage, which they did a lot with that guy and rushed another guy around the other side. It's almost like watching to me, instead of a 4-2-5, it's like watching a 3. It's almost like watching a 3-3-5, you know what I mean? Kind of a bastardized three-man front, you know what I mean? But how much will that work, do you think, in the Big Ten? I mean, or I guess more of the question is, you don't necessarily know that yet, but how does that befuddle an offensive line, or does it?
Well, I mean, the reason they do it, it's if you have a guy standing up, he can obviously have a lot more options of where he's going to go or what he's going to do. Obviously, if your hand's in the dirt, it's a lot harder to change directions and get going, especially if the DN's trying to fire the ball towards a tight end or tackle. So that, I mean, they have him up so you can have a plethora of options depending on the play they call. How it'll work in the Big Ten, I think it'll be fine. I mean, it kind of reminds me back to my senior year when we had Thaddeus Gibson was that guy.
Yeah.
Thaddeus Gibson was the Leo. We had Cam Hayward as the other end. It's basically, like you said, it's not a 3. I don't want to say a 3-3-5, but it's kind of like a 3-4 setup a lot of time. Sometimes if Thaddeus had to drop in the flat, but a lot of times we were bringing a Thad because he didn't really remember all the plays, but a heck of an athlete, had a great couple of years.
Yeah,
but I think it'll be fine in the Big Ten, to be honest. And I think that's what keeps offenses on their toes because, like you said, he could move around. They could bring a backside safety or a backside linebacker. He could drop, he could twist. And that hybrid DN spot where, this year we had the bullet, right, which is kind of the hybrid linebacker safety. Yeah. Now we have Leo coming in as a hybrid linebacker D line. So they have guys on their roster who fit that type right now. So it'll be interesting to see who will be that guy. Yeah. And sometimes you want to show people you can do that, or you're willing to do that just so they have to game plan, right? I mean, just so it has to mess with their mind a little bit, even though they may line up in 4 guys with their hand in the dirt more often than not. But I mean, more often than not now, you see a lot of defenses, even Ohio State, with guys standing up, I mean, you might have 2 guys with their hand in the dirt, sometimes 3, but keep them guessing is sort of the name of the game now, isn't it? Because of the rules. Oh yeah, no question. I mean, I haven't watched enough film on Oklahoma State, so I'm just excited to see the transition of this defense.
Speaking of transitions, here's a segue. You're wearing camo. I appreciate that this morning. I barely saw you there when you came on camera and stuff. How many deer did you end up getting during deer hunting season? Or is it still going on, by the way?
It is still going on. It goes until February 5th. I've gotten 4 deer this year, 3 with rifle and one with my bow so far. Yeah.
Man, you could have survived, man, back in the old days, when you had to build log cabins by hand and during the summer and then hunt for poor little deer looking for something to eat in the middle of the winter. Man, you would have survived big time with that bow and arrow thing. I mean, I was impressed because you sent me a photo from the deer blind the other day. You were sitting up there, your boots were hanging out and stuff. You had that compound bow. I mean, how many pulleys are on that thing, man?
Oh, there's at least, I'm pretty sure there's at least two big pulleys on it.
But the pullback on that is what? I mean, that helps on the pullback, obviously, and stuff. But
mine set at 70 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that's pretty normal. Some people go lighter depending. So the more pounds on your bow, the pullback, the faster, obviously, the arrow comes off. And also the bigger the bow, the faster. So the bigger the drawback. So my drawback's pretty long too. So my bows are coming out pretty hard and fast compared to somebody else. Yeah. So I can eventually take longer shots and feel comfortable with, taking them and knowing it'll be effective on the deer.
I was going to say, it gives you velocity and more range, more velocity and more range, which obviously adds up. That's what flying an airplane's all about, or a rocket. Well, I wanted to ask you this. When you're sitting there in the blind all day, because how many tags did you end up with this? Do you still have a couple of tags left, or how many tags you end up with?
You're allowed to take 6 deer in the state of Ohio per year, and each county is different. So some counties are 2 deers or 3 deers or 4 deers. So once you get that max in that county, you can't hunt in that county again.
Gotcha.
No more than 6. So I have 2 more, and you're only allowed to have one antler, 1 buck a year, and I haven't got one yet. So
Yeah.
I might be searching, but I'm not just going to take down any little guy. I want to make sure they grow up to be big, good-looking bucks someday.
Yeah, before you whack somebody's daddy or granddaddy. But it is funny because where you live, you have access to, you can be in 3 or 4 different counties pretty quickly, right? I mean, you're kind of in a corner up there. So let me ask you this though. You know, people don't understand why so many does and not antlered, but that's how you kind of like control the population, right? Is by taking out does. I mean, do I have that right or?
Yeah. I mean, the reason there's so many doe is because there's a lot bigger population of doe than bucks, and they want a population control, but at the same time, they know it'll keep replenishing because when rut happens and it's mating season, you know, the bucks are extremely outnumbered, so they just are having a good time going from one doe to the other one.
Yeah,
getting, you know, doing the dirty. But that's, you know, part of it. And a lot of people don't realize the population of deer in Ohio have grown tremendously since like the 60s. Like if you ask people who grew up in the 60s or 70s, they'd say they barely saw deer. Yeah. And on record, it looked like there was only about 15 to 20,000 deer back then. Well, right now in Ohio, they're estimating the population is 700,000 or more. Wow. So, I mean, it's come a long way, and every year that number is getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Before they started building houses next door to me, you know, we've lived out where we are, my wife and I here west of Hilliard, just west of Hilliard in Western Franklin County. There used to be a herd of deer that would go down our fence line. We have like 4.5 acres out here, a couple of horses, 3 horses, but they'd go down our fence line every night, man, just going from the woods on one side of the road to woods on the other side and stuff. And now, of course, they're building houses. I once joked with my brother who had a deer lease out on the Llano River out there in Midwest Texas. He paid money, he and his buddies, to have this deer lease that they had to keep up and stuff. But I told him you could come sit on my front porch and get whatever deer you wanted, man, instead of you know, paying probably $1,000 or more a year to make sure you kept corn in the feeder and all that kind of stuff. What's it like though, Jake? I'm not a big hunter, as you well know. I mean, I don't take it away from anybody, but and I'm not making fun, but what is it like? What is the difference between bringing down a deer with a rifle are you allowed to hunt with shotgun in Ohio? You are, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. So in Ohio, it's just, there's certain calibers you can use, and they can't be, they have to be a straight wall cartridge. So it can't be like a shoulder cartridge, which is like an AR cartridge where it's skinnier on the top, gets fat on the bottom.
Gotcha.
Because those are what you call supersonic rounds. So those go faster, and you can shoot way further. So it's, you know, it's not a free season on deer. You know, gun season's only a week and then 2 weekend and an extra weekend. So it's really only 9 days. But the difference between them is just the further out you can get further out shots. You know, bow, I'd say.
No, don't wait. Let me interrupt you. That's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, obviously you are efficient, proficient with a rifle. Hunting with a bow is a total different dynamic, isn't it? I mean, just do you feel like you're more? I don't know, that the deer's got more of a chance. I mean, I don't know, you know, because you're an athletic guy. You know, you've been playing sports. Just what's your take on that?
So the deer have a much better chance versus a bow, no question, because, you know, realistically, most of your shots on a deer are going to be within 40 yards, probably 20 to 40 yards. But then you're also up in a tree stand, so they have to be, you know, there's going to be limbs in the way. There's going to only be a certain amount of shooting windows to be able to pull it off. So they got to go in the right spot. You got to be patient. And deer's eyes are very sensitive to movement. If it's light out and they see you, they could see your eyes blink, but they don't know. They can see the movement, but they don't know that it's the predator. They just can see any slight movements from far away. Yeah. And with a rifle, you're not really moving a lot to set up. With a bow, you got to pull the string back, and then you got to get them in the sights. So it's a better chance for them. And, you know, you can't, you know, my longest shot this year at a deer is about 125 yards. That's impossible. You know, bows, you're not taking that shot. It has to be well within 50, 60 yards max.
Yeah.
To even try to attempt that.
When you got that deer the other day, sitting up there, what was that? What shot was that? How long was that?
That was probably 45 yards.
Yeah. Do you actually pace it off just to kind of know, hey, this is what I did. I mean, I felt really good with this range. I mean, how do you judge yourself in those kind of deals when you go back and replay it?
Well, I shot a lot with my bow at targets, just make sure I sighted in my 20, 30, and 40. And then when you're in the stand, I have a range. I use my golf rangefinder and I pick landmarks. So I can, trees around there. All right, I know that tree's 35 yards. I know that tree's 45 yards. And you go around your 360 of where you can find shots. So then when the deer do walk in, you find them to the landmark and you just kind of have to guess real quick, unless you do have time to shoot it, which sometimes you do. That other day I did not. There's a pack of them that were looking at me, and every time I'd do a sudden movement, their heads would come up and stare at me, and I'd hide behind the tree because I was on the actually other side of the tree. They were behind my tree stand.
Gotcha.
No.
Yeah.
So your heart's beating like crazy, and it's a fun time, and I enjoy deer meat. My whole family does, and nothing goes to waste.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to my deer jerky. By the way, I used to go get firewood down in southeastern Ohio, and I'm trying to think of the little town I went to, but I remember I used to stop for you'd have to load your own firewood from this mill down there. Laurelville, I think, is the area it was in.
Yep.
But I'll never forget, there was this store I'd always stop at on the way back, and they always had this sign during deer season, because that's when I would be down there. It said no bloody money. They didn't want some guy who just field dressed a deer coming in there and slapping down a $5 or $20 bill with deer blood on it. I mean, it is, and you do have to field dress, et cetera. It's an interesting part of the game, right?
Oh, it is. And if you've never done it, you don't know how you'll be in that moment.
Yeah.
It's a pretty humbling experience. Definitely teaches you survivor skills. And, I know some people are against hunting, and I understand. I'm a huge animal guy. I love animals, love watching deer out in their habitat, but I also I enjoy eating the meat. So I guess what's the difference between somebody going to McDonald's and ordering a cheeseburger and they didn't have any part in actually taking down the cow?
No.
Than you just actually being the guy who takes down the deer to eat.
Yeah. Well, like I say, people in New York City, they're big adventure. I always say, they have a lot of people there have no clue about. They go down to the corner store. What? There are no grapes in here today? You know what I mean?
Right.
That's their big.
Right.
A lot of people don't understand where stuff comes from, I guess, is
Right.
the point making there. By the way, you ought to just get permission to hunt on the Medallion. You remember Medallion Country Club? You ought to get permission just to hunt there. Remember when we're playing there? You had me as a guest, and me and Paul Spahn, and we're playing, and we look over at John Kasich's front yard there, and there's deer eating on his front yard, eating his flowers. I think that one day. I mean, you'll just let them let you control the population there. You'd have plenty of deer meat, man.
Well, funny story is there is 70 or 80 deer living on property in Medallion. Now, that's all fine and good, but they cause a lot of damage to the course.
Oh, yeah.
And the course has to pay for it. So a couple years ago, they called Ohio Wildlife and told them about the problem. So Ohio Wildlife sent some guys in there who had permission to take down these deers out of season. And they did. They took about 12 of them out of there, and people who were living in Medallion got really upset and supposedly came to the clubhouse armed to try and get these guys to stop taking out deer.
Armed.
So that's what I heard. That's what the club, the head of membership told me.
Wow.
So now they're actively working, because I called him the other day. I'm like, hey, can I hunt on property? And he laughed, and I was like, I get the optics. Me covered in camouflage, dragging a deer carcass through a neighborhood, probably not the best. And he was laughing, but he's like, no, actually, we're working with Medallion HOA and Division of Wildlife to figure out when we can take some of these deer out. And he's like, so I can add you to the list. I'm like, there's a list? He's like, yeah, you're the 5th member who wants to help take them down.
Oh man, that's good. I knew that would lead to a nice anecdote. Hey, Jake, I appreciate you being on the Tim A podcast again, my man. I wanted to ask one last thing before we get out of here. Back to football. like you said a while ago, I think it's a sign of intelligence and a sign of maturity that a head coach realizes this isn't working. You know, I think if Ryan Day could have made those changes the second, third week of the year, because, you know, you kind of gave Kerry Combs and that group, you know, 2020 was not a referendum year. You know what I mean? I mean, with everything that went on, shortened season, everything was hyphenated in that year, abbreviated, whatever aided you want to throw in there, conjugated finally against Alabama. But a game that, you know, you could tell he was very upset with the way things went down in those first two games, right? Against Minnesota and Oregon. I don't know what marks you give him, like you said, for stepping up and making these changes. I mean, because he knows ultimately it's his butt on the line too, right? I mean, he understands that.
I mean, I give him a lot of credit. Those aren't easy situations. And other coaches might have just said after two games, like, all right, well, we'll keep the same guys in place. They'll figure it out. It's growing pains too, but Ohio State, you don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And he understood that. And he called on Matt Barnes, and Matt Barnes got handed a real raw deal, in my opinion. Like, hey, you're now the defensive coordinator, and he didn't have a whole offseason or spring ball to install what his game plan and his scheme and what he expects from his players. And I honestly think he did a heck of a job for the situation at hand.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, for Coach Day to look, at the first two games and make a tough decision, especially with Kerry Combs, who is a great man, great mentor, great coach, Ohio guy through and through. And to make that difficult decision shows you where his,
priorities
feelings and priorities are at. Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, Matt Barnes landed on his feet and became defensive coordinator at University of Memphis, AKA Memphis State. You think that's a good move for him too, isn't it? I mean, I think he's a sharp guy. I mean, I told people he kind of reminded me of Belichick, and everybody, I didn't say he was the next Belichick, but he kind of reminds me of Belichick in the way he kind of goes about his business, kind of like, isn't a real, he can have a conversation with you on an intelligent level, but he's not really big on small talk for the most part. I just liked how matter of fact he was about a lot of things, or how he really didn't tell you a whole lot. I mean,
right.
Kept most of it to himself. But what's just your take on him specifically?
I think he'll be definitely up. I think he'll do a great job at Memphis. He's definitely, I think, a hot up and comer coach. I wouldn't be surprised in 3, 4, 5 years if he's either a major defensive coordinator somewhere at a bigger program, or a head coach if he wants to step in that direction.
Yeah.
I've got to know him a little bit. Great guy, not a huge talker, but can have conversations about anything when you do. But I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't be so. I was kind of bummed we had to let him go, but I understand Buckeye Nation and the pressure that Day is under. And I've been telling buddies, it's hard to do a great job when the horses aren't in the stable. Like, people would be shocked. I was shocked. I think I said this at the Michigan game. I tweeted it. It's just very shocking how the lack of talent we had on the defensive side of ball this year. A lot of it's inexperience, but we just didn't have any dudes, and he had to try and figure it out with what he had. And I think he's going to have a lot of success moving forward. Yeah,
when you the Rose Bowl, Steel Chambers, Cade Stover, I think both of them started at linebacker in that game. Neither one of them was a linebacker this time a year ago. Cade Stover has defense in his background. Obviously, Steel Chambers does too, but that just shows you how they were trying to make, chicken soup, you know what I mean?
Right.
Without a lot of stock, I think is the best way of putting it, right?
Exactly.
But anyway, hey, Jake Ballard, appreciate you again, man. And I got to get in one of those 2-man deer stands with you one of these days, man, just to kind of document the situation. And people don't understand. I'm also going to try to help, quote, manage you on a long driving tour. We're going to get that set up, but you're feeling pretty good about that right now, aren't you?
I am, but I haven't got any swings in a while, so I need to get on indoor spots and get some swings in.
Hey, that could be our excuse for having telling our wives you got to go to spring training, down in Florida, get to, a couple of weeks, you know what I mean, to get everything tuned up. But
I'm down.
I got you. Well, all I know is I've seen you hit the ball in a simulator before, and I feel it's one of the few times in life you feel sorry for a simulator, because oh my goodness, when you can hit a ball so hard it hits the screen of the simulator and then hits the wall behind the screen, you've got something going for you, don't you? You got to feel you pretty good there, right?
Yeah, we'll just see how it comes this year when I start making the tours, if I can get to any tournaments.
Yeah, just reminded me of when you were talking about that 12-gauge slug a while ago, firing out of the shotgun, man. The power there is obvious, but we'll talk about that on another day. Jake Ballard, once again, thanks for joining me, my man.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I always appreciate having big Jake Ballard on here, man. When I'm managing him on the long driving tour, we're going to make some waves. I just know it. He's like our buddy Will Crawl, man. When he hits a golf ball, the golf ball knows about it, right?
Yeah, I haven't really I've only seen a couple of social media clips and then heard the secondhand exploits from when you and Ballard are out there playing some scrambles and cleaning up, winning all the money around Columbus. But I've got to see it because, I play my fair share of events too. I'd love to see, like, maybe let's get Stoney and Will and Ballard out there, and when they really connect. Now, I know from two of those three that it might not always go where it needs to go, but it's going really far no matter which direction.
Wait a minute. Who are you guessing it goes where it's supposed to go? Who are you guessing on that? Jake? No, well, I know it doesn't always go where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, I know Will doesn't play enough anymore to find that consistency, and that's why he doesn't want to pick up the club a lot. Stoney, man, it's 75% of the time pretty good with that.
Yeah.
Finding the fairway with the driver, and it is crazy long. But so maybe all three of them. I just didn't want to speak for Ballard with the directional aspect. But I guess when you're swinging that hard, any mistake is magnified. So it's going to be hard to be perfect all the time.
Hey, before we jump into it, this is what drives me nuts about a guy like Jake, though, because this is what I love about him, too. He could dial it back 20% and hit the ball over 300 routinely. But I give it up to him, man. It's like Ben Hogan said, take your swing, man. Take your swing at the ball. And, and he does. And boy, when he connects, you can ask my buddy Moose Spahn, Paul Spahn, when he connects, or Dave Holmes, when he connects sweetly, man, that ball goes. It's an amazing thing to watch because, you think you're playing pretty well, and then you step up there. I mean, I hit the ball pretty good for a 67-year-old, pretty far. I even won a long driving contest this year for seniors at this one scramble. But it's just another realm, man, when a guy hits it 100 yards farther than you, 150 yards farther than you do in some cases. You've played for those guys. You know what I'm talking about. Well, you hit the ball a long way yourself.
Well, I don't know about that.
You hit it from the wrong side of the ball. That's your problem.
Well, I know that it's a different game when Stoney connects and is in the fairway, and we're looking at having a 7-iron into par fives, and I'm used to having a full go at a 3-wood. I mean, the game changes completely for them. Now, when you swing that aggressively, a lot of times it doesn't quite translate when you do get that 7-iron in your hand, and that's where I come in to help these guys out. And I love that's why I prefer these days scramble, 2-man scramble, 4-man scramble, whatever.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're playing against these guys. That gets tough. That's a little bit. A little bit emasculating to have to follow that up. You're
either playing with them or against them. Hey, man, have them on your side, right? Hey, speaking of that, I wanted to say this before I forget about it, man. As we record this, it's Martin Luther King Day again, and I just think back when I was growing up in Alabama back in the 50s and 60s, and just what that man meant. And I once had to write not a term paper. We had to just write a little paper one time in junior college when I was in Lufkin, Texas, and name a hero or heroes of yours growing up. And I said, well, my heroes growing up were Martin Luther King Jr. and Joe Namath. And I said, the reason you had to be there, and I think I got a B on that because she didn't like my writing, but that's not the first time I've heard that. But the point was, man, growing up in Alabama in the mid 60s, we moved to Texas when I was 11 years old in 65. But the things I saw and heard, and you were proud of this football team, and yet you weren't proud of all this other stuff that was going on around. And yet you knew there were these people that were trying to make a difference. And Martin Luther King Jr. was definitely one of those. The guts that man had, the bravery he had, forget about his eloquence, speaking, etc. And basically the peaceful demonstrations that he pushed. Think about the difference he made, Austin, because we watched that national championship game the other night, Georgia and Alabama. Neither one of those had an African-American player until the early 70s.
Right.
Neither one of those. And now look at them. They celebrate the African-American college football player. It's crazy how far things have come, how far those programs have come once once everybody embraced the idea that all men are created equal, just give me a shot, And to me, it kind of gives me goosebumps every time I think about the bravery shown by Martin Luther King Jr. and many others in that time. I mean, Selma, Alabama was only 50 miles east of where I grew up in Demopolis, Alabama on US Highway 80. And, all my kid folks were in the Tuscaloosa, Birmingham area. And just all the stuff that went on back then was just crazy. And just to see where we are now, yeah, we've got a tremendous distance still to go. But to see where we are now, it's stark to me.
Yeah, and I think that it's well worth remembering that, especially in the context that you bring it up in our realm, how far athletics has come and how important that is. We say this a lot, and we said this during COVID. The world could move on without sports, but it affects so many lives, and it's so important for so many people. And some of the impetus for change comes from that. And that's not to shift the tone of appreciation for Martin Luther King to that, but that's going to be a reflection. So many people see those African Americans succeeding at such a high level, and a lot of that wouldn't have been possible without some of the things that were going on and the bravery that was shown in the 60s. And we're talking about just making the speech. That takes a huge amount of stones to do that, but it's also, when you listen to the content of it, one of the greatest, I think, that's ever been delivered. If you remove you just read it and not understand where and how and why that it was being given, just incredible message, incredible eloquence, well written, well delivered, well spoken, all of it. I mean, it's one of the greatest speeches, and certainly one of the most famous speeches of all time, and deservedly so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And, it's really interesting to me. I always tell I've only got one brother left now. I used to have three, but they were all huge Alabama fans. And it's just really my baby brother, Tony. My baby brother is 64. But it's just amazing to me that Alabama football, as far back as it goes, the national championships involved, the Bear Bryant era and stuff, it didn't have a Heisman Trophy winner until Mark Ingram, and all of their Heisman Trophy winners to date have been African American. That just tells you a lot, I think it just puts an exclamation point on how far things have come in that realm. But let's move on past that. The preface was Ryan Day taking a swing at this tree, man, with his axe. Sometimes you got to chop things down before you can build that new log cabin. I think that's what he's looking for defensively. We saw him do this. There's an example of things being changed overnight, is the wrong term, over a season defensively. When he first took the job, Greg Schiano was out. Jeff Hafley came in. Ryan hired two coaches from Michigan. Are you kidding me? Boom. They went from one of the worst defenses in the country in 2018 to arguably one of the top 5 defenses in the country under the direction of Jeff Hafley. This thing has happened before. It can happen again. Do you get the sense that with Perry Eliano, with Tim Walton, and of course with new defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, that this thing can be fixed in essence immediately in terms of football talk?
Yeah, and I think that some of the improvement was going to occur naturally. We've talked ad nauseum about how much inexperience Ohio State had. Well, just about any scheme with more experience is going to be more successful, and these guys are going to have another year in the weight room and all those factors that were going to lead to some improvement. But if you're able to come in and clearly coach this and maximize what can be a complex scheme, which is similar to what I was thinking about, some of the Jeff Hafley conversations when you bring up his name there and how rapid that transformation was. Like, he always said, "Oh, I don't think that our scheme is that hard." And we try to make it simple for them to understand. But when you're able to run a variety of things that, players are able to comprehend and execute, well, that makes you that much more difficult, to prepare for and play against for offenses. And Jim Knowles and Eliano and Walton and then Larry Johnson returning, they're still going to have to get these results, and they're going to have to teach it. They're going to have to make sure that they understand it, and those guys are going to have to play really hard. But I would think with a large number of veterans now returning, and you have Tanner McAllister helping as part of that in the secondary coming in from Oklahoma State, and Zach Harrison will be back after that announcement over Friday. You have players at all three levels that understand what it takes to play at a high level, what it's going to take to get to a championship level and beyond. And then if you factor in, maybe more schematic improvements or different fundamental emphasis on tackling or whatever. I don't know what specifically it's going to be under Knowles. I think we can have a pretty good guess, but where will the biggest strides be made? I don't know. I know that he's delivered them at Duke and at Oklahoma State, and now is going to have more talent at his disposal than he ever has before. So, I don't know how far up that number is going to go, but I think it's reasonable to expect that it should be significant.
Yeah. And Jake and I talked about a few of those differences defensively that you could see, with that stand-up Leo and moving around and, just all these little schemes he came up with in the Big 12 to confound Big 12 offenses. The thing that stands out to me about Jim Knowles is he wants the offense to be defensive. He wants the offense to be going back after every possession going, well, wait a minute, now we figured this out, but now they're doing this, and you can do that by just moving a couple of guys around, that's what they've got going for them, which they had with Jeff Hafley, which you and I both talked about. We both wrote about back then, offensively and defensively. There wasn't a team in the country making adjustments as the game went on. Forget about, hey, we'll get to halftime, we'll get this figured out while we're sucking on our orange slices. You know what I mean? There were defensive adjustments going on. As the game went on. Hafley was up in the box. We'll see where Jim Knowles ends up, but Hafley was up in the box. They were adjusting as on the fly, and that to me is the dynamic you want at Ohio State. I think you agree, right? Last year it just seemed like the adjustment almost didn't come till the next week or something, or maybe 2 weeks from now. It was and that's not knocking anything, because I thought, as Jake pointed out, Matt Barnes was kind of handed, wow, hey, fix this mess, do it now, kind of like walking into a hotel room that's been blown asunder and you got to get it ready for the next guest, in 2 hours. It's hard to do. And not that I've ever done that, but I appreciate the people that do. But back in the time of Guns N' Roses and stuff, you know where I'm going with that. But anyway, but it is interesting, because I think that's where this defense is going again. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I would say that part of it, and this, every time I say it, it sounds like excuse making. I think it's just a reality. Ohio State was too slow and maybe too stubborn to make adjustments, but that's harder to do when you don't have players with that base of knowledge. And that's why I say, some of this improvement, if the staff had stayed completely the same, I believe this strongly, maybe Ohio State would not be a top 10 defense with that group of coaches. Maybe, it was justified to make the moves that were made. I'm not suggesting at all that they weren't. I think it was pretty clear that it wasn't working the way Ryan Day wanted, which is why these changes happened. I'm just saying that when you're dealing with that level of inexperience, you don't have, all right, well, let's go to this. Remember when we ran this against this team, we're going to dial that up. That blitz, remember, we haven't run it in 6 weeks, but we need to do that again. If you're not repping it, and if you haven't guys who've done it in a game, you can't just say, it's not like Madden. All right, well, I'm gonna abandon this thing and I'm gonna go do this in the middle of it. That makes it easier, right? When it's a video game, but when it's real life, you don't have the whole playbook available. You're not gonna be able to make dramatic scheme changes within the game, especially if the guys don't know it and they can't execute it. Now, obviously it's not to the level of Ohio State and Alabama in the title game, where you saw that stuff and there was no way it was ever going to work, but that was the best they thought they could do.
Yeah.
They had more players available to them last year, and you would have thought that you'd see more of that diversity. And I think for a lot, in the middle of the stretch of that season, Penn State and Nebraska, maybe we were seeing that, but it certainly wasn't good enough when you got to a more level playing field and on the road in the snow against Michigan. And there's no real debating about that. But now if you have that in your back pocket, because this staff gets to come in, they've got a full offseason, and they've got veteran players who have some experience now in the 4-2-5 and what Jim Knowles may be running. It's not going to be identical, but there's going to be familiarity there that Ohio State can build off of. I think that's a really significant part to keep in mind.
Yeah, and let's face it, the linebacker. We talked about this last week. The linebacker room was just a mess this year. I mean, because you had guys who you thought were going to step up. Remember, and I was pursuing that kind of thing, Al Washington basically sort of poo-pooed a little bit. Just because a guy's been around long, and you said this too, just because a guy's been around a long time doesn't mean right now, he's been patient, doesn't mean all of a sudden now he's the guy, right. And that really hit some of those guys sideways. And it turned out some of those guys weren't the guy, right. Definitely. And then you look at the group they were working with at the end of the year, Taraji Mitchell's a captain, whatever, he's not even starting, hardly playing. And, he's the guy that sort of had the quarterback in his midst, but let him go on that 4th and 1 in the Rose Bowl and stuff. Of course, he was being held on that play, but who cares, right? It didn't get called. But the point was, it just didn't work. I mean, at the end of the year, you've got Cade Stover and Steele Chambers starting at linebacker in the Rose Bowl. Two guys who weren't linebackers a year ago this time. And you're just going, wow. But like you keep pointing out, though, Jim Knowles is benefiting from the fact that a lot of guys got thrown into the fire this year, learned on the job, and he's going to benefit from that experience, both good and bad. But, what really stands out to me is even when I asked Steele Chambers about what Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator at Michigan, said about them being, not physical enough, whatever, he goes, well, he was telling the truth in that game. There is a self-awareness there by these guys that they weren't good enough, right? And that really helps you when you're coming in and making some changes, as opposed to you're walking in a room, well, it wasn't us, it was them, it was the coaches. No, it was everybody.
Well, and that's probably more important than what I'm going to say is that the players take accountability of that. But if Ryan Day doesn't as well, then you're not ever going to get it fixed and take it to the next level. And he recognized that. This goes back to your whole premise here.
Yeah.
There was a belief that because of the way he handled the last 2 years with, Kerry Combs with a limited sample size, but bringing him back and then having the patience and writing off 2020 as a weird year, which it was, Matt Barnes, promoting Parker Fleming, there was just this sense, and I know because I read it all the time on the message boards on Lettermen Row, that Ryan Day wasn't making these aggressive hires, and it really sparked in my mind when you talked about Al Washington and Greg Madison initially, and the aggressive move to go across the rivalry to bring in two coaches. Like, we're still dealing with a very small sample size. So if you're going to deal with the last 2 years and say that wasn't aggressive enough, you should probably remember the difficult situation he was in and the remaking that he had to do for year one and those moves he made and how well they worked. I don't think he anticipated that Jeff Hafley would only be around for 1 year. And that kind of disrupted a lot of that flow and continuity that he may have wanted. It means he made a great hire. And he's having to do this more significantly than he's had to or felt the need to from the previous two cycles. So, we'll see if he gets it right again.
Yeah.
If Knowles is really on that Hafley type level, if Eliano can have that same impact that he had at Cincinnati in a couple of years, which was really, really good, with Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant, and Tim Walton, who's going to understand how to sell Ohio State better than just about anybody from wearing that uniform, being at both levels and winning some rings and championships. We can't make a verdict on that. I would just say that this was a reminder that that guy from the first year who did whatever it took to bring in the people that he felt were best suited for Ohio State at that time. I think he has no choice but to try and do that again. And he wasn't willing to stay put and stand pat or just hire people that he already knows, because these three people on defense, he didn't.
Yeah.
So he's gone outside here to try and get it fixed.
Yeah, that is interesting. When I have a chance to talk with Ryan, I'm really curious to know, and you may know this already, but how much did Knowles have any input on these two hires he made? Because these two hires, are interesting to me, because one is almost a legacy hire with Tim Walton. I remember covering him as a player. Always liked it. He was one of those go-to guys you'd go to and get quotes from, because he knew what the heck was going on. I'm talking about had an awareness of what was going on the field. You know what I mean? Things like that. I really liked dealing with him as a player. We'll see how it is as a coach, and then Eliano, I think his recent record speaks for itself. Plus, he's been around. People are talking about, he's coached in Ohio before, but his background of being from Texas and stuff, I think bodes well from a recruiting standpoint, along with everything else. He knows where the back roads are in Texas, man. He lived in Nacogdoches for 4 years at least. You know what I mean? That's just right up the road from Lufkin. Those are back roads. But it's not that bad. But my point is, I get the sense that Ryan, had as much to do with those guys being hired as being those guys being pointed out to him by Knowles. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would say that process had to be collaborative, because if Ryan Day is going to trust that everything is in position on that side of the ball, so he can be hands off, then he needs to build some of that trust in the interview process. He needs to be working hand in hand with Knowles to make sure that that's in place and he's not going to have to worry about it. So he needs that familiarity with what those guys can bring. And I think the reason that you look at this and say that it couldn't have just been purely Knowles is that he didn't just bring in people from Oklahoma State or just bring in people from Duke. Now there are some, options for analysts and quality control people that are coming from there with experience in Jim Knowles' system. That's a fact, and they'll all be, confirmed in due time. But, when they're looking at these other two spots in the secondary, and I know of 5, I think, interviews, and there may have been more, probably were, but the pool of candidates were not, all right, let's find people who have only worked with Jim Knowles or only know his system. That wasn't the situation. So they both got together on this and found people that fit. And I think that's a pretty good sign about the early parts of the Knowles Day sort of partnership here. Yeah.
And Eliano, he coached 2 cornerbacks at Cincinnati that are going to be high round draft picks,
Yep.
So he knows how to get that done, even though he's going to coach safeties. So we'll see where that goes. But and then Tim Walton, I'm talking about, you're talking about, replacing Kerry Combs, and the obviously the first round draft picks he coached, et cetera, his ability to recruit and stuff. But, you're replacing him also with a guy, Tim Walton, who not only, knows what it takes to get to the league. He's coached in the league for years. He knows what what is expected of players at that level. And I think that brings an instant respect in that room, on the defensive side of the ball with the defensive backs. Hey, this is a guy who's been coaching where we want to get to. Wow, we're going to listen to this guy, right?
Yeah, and I think that I would be remiss if we didn't bring this up as well. Like when Kerry Combs, and everybody involved makes this decision that they're going to go different ways, it shouldn't be dismissed how much Kerry Combs gave to Ohio State and his value. And I think that because it didn't work out with the coordinator role, it became a little bit overlooked how significant it was going to be to replace him. Because in the end, you're talking about the streak of first-round NFL cornerbacks, the success on the recruiting trail that was still ongoing, and he was a key part of that, until 10 days ago or so. The passion that he had for the program that was unmistakable anytime, the energy, you're like, wow, gosh, I'm sitting here thinking about, well, that's going to be hard to replace every part of that.
Yes.
And I don't know if Tim Walton can, but you do now have an alum coming in who's going to have understood and be able to have that passion for Ohio State that's unmatchable. As you said, he's worked with NFL cornerbacks. We'll see, just how much success he has developing them to get there, but he will certainly understand what that takes at that position. Ties to Florida and Georgia, aside from being familiar with Columbus and the state of Ohio. So a lot of the boxes that Kerry checked to great success over the years. Well, Tim Walton has that as well. So I think they did about as well as they could when you're talking about some of the intangible parts for what Kerry Combs brought to that unit and that position. Again, all of this is new. It's a couple of days old, so you can't make a sweeping judgment one way or the other. But I mean, there also should be, and I'm not saying that there's not from everybody, but appreciation for what Kerry Combs did, and how big the shoes that leaves for Tim Walton to replace if he's going in there to work with cornerbacks.
Yeah, I told Kerry Combs a couple of weeks ago. I said, "You're an iconic figure." I mean, because I've never seen anybody before who could literally put in Kerry Combs's niche and go, that guy's just like that guy. No, he's unlike anybody I've ever been around. He reminds me of a fusion reactor, just self-contained, just energy all the time and stuff. And, you wish him nothing but the best. I mean, I know I do, et cetera. I wanted to ask you this real quirky here before we go. Obviously, it was learned over the weekend that Al Washington Jr. is being hired by Notre Dame. Great landing spot for him as defensive line coach, it looks like, and run defense coordinator. Say run game coordinator, but that sounds like he's on the offense. Right. Run defense coordinator. And this is just a facetious comment, okay? But he's been named run defense coordinator for Notre Dame, and we saw Ohio State's run defense in games that really mattered this year. And I'm just going, well, wow. If he had the answers, why didn't he let somebody know about them? I mean, and I'm being facetious, obviously, but Marcus Freeman is mining that Ohio State situation about as well as you can, right? But did the same question pop into your head? Well, wait a minute. If he had the answers, why didn't they come forth?
I think because of what's been going on with Marcus Freeman and the public comments and the private interviews or offers or whatever, Notre Dame has been obsessed with Ohio State for the last 6 weeks or so since Brian Kelly left. And I find it amusing a little bit because, I think anybody would want to copy the success of this program that we talked about. But you're not going to be able to lift it and place it in South Bend and just have the same success. Like, most of the staff returning has had the phone ring and a South Bend area code pop up on their screen. Marcus Freeman has been trying very aggressively. I don't know if it's to mess with Ryan Day, if it's to truly just think that he can bring the success of Columbus over and input all that knowledge and wisdom and then it'll work for them. I don't know what it is. Yeah. I know that trend exists, and it's just funny because they play each other in the opener, and I don't know why you would want to, poke that bear.
You stole my line. Remember when I asked Jim Harbaugh that one time?
Eat the snake, wrap it, whatever.
He said he didn't get animal analogies. He had just used the term about his team being an anaconda. That was the year before. But go ahead, though. Go ahead. You're exactly right. What's going on, man? What do you think's going on?
I just think I don't know any other. I don't know any other word. I'm just amused by it. It's because I know Marcus. I've known him for a long time, just like you have, and I'm very intrigued by what he's going to do there, and I'm certainly ready for September 3rd to get back out there and see another game with what's going to happen with the next season. I'm going to enjoy spring ball as well. I don't want to fast forward through all that, but there's just a lot going on here that you wonder exactly why that is, because a lot of first-time coaches are not looking to just go through one lane and everything has been so focused on Ohio State. I find that odd.
Yeah.
I'd like to keep digging at that, and I'm sure that we will by the time September rolls around.
Well, it's no secret that he came after Brian Hartline, and I understand. I mean, Brian Hartline is not only a hell of a coach, he's a hell of a recruiter. Just don't call him a recruiter to his face, right? He was a relationship builder. But Kerry Combs.
has been contacted by Notre Dame. Brian Hartline, Tony Alford, as an option to go back there. James Laurinaitis, you already got a piece of that, and he hired Al Washington.
Yeah.
That's 5 right there.
Yeah.
I mean,
there it is, ladies and gentlemen.
There may be another one. I just don't want to say it.
Yeah, I know. But I know what you're talking about. But anyway, it's crazy. I guess September 3rd, we're going to find out, man. It's going to be fun. I don't know what buoys you more, a coaching change and then you take a big lead in a bowl game and then blow it, or a situation where a coach is going to make some big changes. You get behind in a bowl game, you come back and win with one of the great offensive performances in in college football history. I would think one team is riding a wave and the other team might have already gone over that wave. I don't know. We're going to find out on September the 3rd, right?
Yeah. There's going to be incredible hype for this opener. I'm so excited already.
Yeah, me too, man. Hey, but you know what? We'll just keep it in check. We've got a bunch of these podcasts to do between now and then. And awesome. Thanks for joining me in my brand new cockpit, even though yours looks exactly the same. I appreciate you once again on the Tim May podcast, man. You know how much I admire you. I'm going to blow smoke, here for a little while.
Wow.
You know how much I admire you, et cetera. And I appreciate you joining me again, my man.
My pleasure.
Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, for Austin Ward, I don't call him awesome anymore, but I should. But for Austin Ward, he keeps breaking stories out there. This is Tim May. We'll see you then.